My name is Zoe Martinez, and at 32, I thought I understood the rhythms of Gypsum Regional Hospital in White Cliffs, Nevada. As the lead privacy compliance officer, I'd spent 4 years navigating the delicate balance between patient care and regulatory requirements, ensuring our 200-bed facility maintained the highest standards of confidentiality and data protection. The morning shift change at 6 a.m. always brought a familiar energy to our corridors. Badge scanners beeped steadily as staff accessed secure areas, the Epic electronic health record system hummed with overnight updates, and the administrative wing buzzed with the quiet efficiency that kept our rural hospital running smoothly. White Cliffs might be small, but Gypsum Regional served 3 counties, and our reputation for excellence meant everything. That Tuesday in March started like any other. I arrived early, my security badge granting access to the administrative suite, where patient privacy protocols were my domain. The coffee was still brewing when I noticed the first irregularity: unusual after-hours access logs in our system. Someone had been reviewing patient files at 2:47 a.m., well outside normal shift parameters. The access belonged to Cameron Bennett, our substitute nurse who'd been covering shifts in the medical surgical unit for the past 6 months. Cameron had impressed everyone with quick adaptation to our systems and genuine care for patients. Dr. Bethany Morrison, our chief of staff, had specifically praised Cameron's attention to detail during our last department meeting. I pulled up the audit trail, expecting to find a simple explanation, perhaps an emergency admission or urgent medication reconciliation. Instead, I found something that made my coffee grow cold in my hands. The accessed files belonged to patients who hadn't been admitted that night, patients whose cases were closed, whose treatment had concluded weeks ago. The pattern emerged slowly over the following days. Cameron's access logs showed a concerning trend of reviewing historical patient records, particularly those involving sensitive social situations. As someone who handled research data privacy and confidentiality protocols, I recognized the signs of potential HIPAA violations, but something felt more personal, more targeted about these particular breaches. During our weekly compliance meeting, I mentioned the irregular access patterns to our IT security manager, Bethany Richardson. Her expression shifted from routine interest to genuine concern as I outlined the timeline. "Have you spoken with Cameron directly?" she asked, her fingers drumming against the conference table. "Not yet. I wanted to gather more data first, ensure I wasn't missing context." But context was exactly what I was missing. The files Cameron accessed shared no obvious medical connections. Different departments, different attending physicians, different insurance providers. The only common thread I could identify was that many involved patients from our domestic violence support program, a confidential service we provided in partnership with the county's Family Crisis Center. The realization settled in my stomach like ice water. These weren't random privacy violations or innocent curiosity about former patients. Someone was systematically accessing the most vulnerable patient records in our system, and I was the only one who seemed to notice. That evening, as I locked my office and headed toward the parking garage, I caught sight of Cameron near the medical records department, badge in hand, accessing areas that shouldn't have been necessary for a substitute nurse's duties. Our eyes met briefly across the hallway, and something in Cameron's expression, a flash of calculation, perhaps recognition, told me my investigation hadn't gone unnoticed. The automatic doors closed behind me with their usual soft hiss, but the sound felt different now, more final. The desert air carried the scent of sage and distant rain, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the hospital's security lights, I sensed that the careful order of Gypsum Regional was about to unravel in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made White Cliffs feel suspended between earth and sky. I arrived at Gypsum Regional 30 minutes early, my usual routine now carrying additional weight. The employee parking lot was nearly empty, save for the overnight staff vehicles and the familiar sight of Cameron's silver sedan in the visitor section, an odd choice for someone with employee badge access. I made my way through the main entrance, nodding to security guard Bethany Torres, who had worked the early shift for nearly a decade. Her smile was warm but distracted. She was reviewing incident reports from the previous evening on her tablet. "Quiet night?" I asked, pausing at her desk. "Mostly. Had some issues with badge access logs around midnight. System glitches, probably." She glanced up, her expression thoughtful. "You know how these electronic systems can be temperamental." The comment struck me as significant, though I couldn't articulate why. I made a mental note to review the overnight access reports when I reached my office. My department occupied the third floor of the hospital's administrative wing, a space that balanced the clinical atmosphere of patient care areas with the corporate efficiency required for compliance oversight. The morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced above workstations where my colleagues would soon arrive. I settled at my desk and opened the Epic system, navigating to the access audit trail I had been monitoring. The overnight activity showed several entries under Cameron's credentials, all time-stamped between 11:47 p.m. and 12:23 a.m. The accessed records belonged to patients I didn't immediately recognize, but the pattern was becoming unmistakable. Each file contained sensitive information related to domestic violence situations, protective orders, or emergency contact restrictions. Dr. Cameron Walsh, our chief medical officer, arrived at 7:30 sharp, his presence immediately shifting the department's energy. He was a man who commanded respect through competence rather than intimidation, and his morning rounds through the administrative floors served as both quality assurance and morale building. "Zoe, good morning," he said, stopping at my cubicle. "I understand you've been conducting some additional audit work on our access protocols." "Yes, sir. I've identified some patterns that warrant closer examination." "Walk me through what you've found." I pulled up the spreadsheet I had been maintaining, highlighting the irregular access patterns. Dr. Walsh studied the data with the same methodical attention he brought to patient charts, his expression growing more serious as the scope became clear. "These are all domestic violence cases," he said finally. "That's my assessment as well. The accessing party is Cameron Bennett, our substitute nurse from the staffing agency. The timing suggests after-hours access when fewer people would notice the activity." Dr. Walsh was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from the computer screen to the window overlooking the hospital's main entrance. "Have you documented everything according to our incident reporting protocols?" "I'm in the process of compiling a comprehensive report. I wanted to ensure accuracy before escalating." "Good. Continue your investigation, but be discreet. If this is what it appears to be, we're dealing with a serious breach of patient trust." He paused, his voice lowering slightly. "And Zoe, be careful. People who violate patient confidentiality in this manner often have motivations that extend beyond simple curiosity." The warning resonated throughout the morning as I continued my analysis. By lunchtime, I had identified 17 separate incidents over the past 6 weeks, each involving patients whose medical records contained information about abusive relationships, court orders, or safe house placements. The systematic nature of the access pattern suggested someone with specific knowledge of how to locate these particular cases within our database. I was reviewing the most recent entries when Cameron appeared at my cubicle, carrying a coffee cup and wearing the kind of casual smile that had initially made me trust them completely. "Busy morning?" Cameron asked, settling into the chair beside my desk without invitation. "The usual compliance reviews," I replied, minimizing the audit window on my screen. "How are things in the ICU?" "Challenging, but manageable. I've been thinking about our conversation last week regarding patient privacy protocols. You mentioned some concerns about access patterns?" The question felt loaded, though Cameron's tone remained conversational. I studied their expression, searching for signs of the calculation I had glimpsed the previous evening. "Just routine monitoring, part of my regular responsibilities." "Of course. I imagine you see all sorts of interesting patterns in the data. Must be fascinating to understand how information flows through the hospital systems." Something in the phrasing made my skin prickle. Cameron was fishing for information, trying to determine how much I knew about their activities. I maintained eye contact, keeping my expression neutral. "It's mostly administrative work, not particularly exciting." Cameron laughed, but the sound felt forced. "Well, if you ever need someone to explain the clinical side of things, I'm happy to help. Sometimes the medical context can clarify what might look unusual in the access logs." After Cameron left, I immediately called Bethany Richardson in IT security. She arrived at my office within minutes, her expression serious as I explained the conversation. "They're probing," she said without hesitation. "Classic behavior when someone knows they're being investigated. The question is whether they're planning to cover their tracks or escalate their activities." "What do you recommend?" "We need to move quickly. I'll implement additional monitoring on Cameron's access credentials, and we should prepare a formal report for administration." "But Zoe, I need you to understand something. If Cameron is systematically accessing domestic violence records, they might be sharing that information with someone outside the hospital. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Patient confidentiality violations were serious enough, but if Cameron was providing sensitive information to abusers seeking their victims, the consequences could be life-threatening. That afternoon, I worked with renewed urgency, cross-referencing Cameron's access patterns with patient admission dates and discharge summaries. The picture that emerged was even more disturbing than I had initially suspected. Cameron wasn't randomly browsing sensitive records. They were specifically targeting patients whose cases involved ongoing legal proceedings or recent relocations for safety reasons. At 4:30, as the day shift prepared to transition to evening coverage, I received a call from the hospital's main operator. Ms. Martinez, I have someone on line 3 asking about patient information. They claim to be conducting a follow-up survey for domestic violence services, but something feels off about their questions. Transfer the call to me. The voice on the other end was male, professional, but insistent. He claimed to represent a nonprofit organization conducting research on domestic violence recovery outcomes, and he specifically requested information about patients who had been treated in our emergency department over the past 2 months. I'm sorry, but we don't provide patient information to external researchers without proper authorization and patient consent, I explained. I understand your position, but this research is crucial for improving services. Perhaps if I spoke with someone more familiar with your domestic violence protocols. I was told a nurse named Cameron Bennett might be able to help. The connection was unmistakable. I ended the call immediately and documented every detail of the conversation. Cameron wasn't just accessing confidential records. They were actively facilitating external access to patient information. As evening approached and the hospital settled into its quieter nighttime rhythm, I finalized my incident report. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. Systematic privacy violations, unauthorized access to sensitive records, and apparent coordination with external parties seeking protected information. I was preparing to submit the report when my computer screen flickered, and I noticed someone had attempted to access my user account from a different terminal. The login attempt had failed, but the timestamp showed it had occurred just minutes earlier, while I was still logged in at my desk. Cameron was no longer content with accessing patient records. They were now trying to determine how much I knew about their activities, and the escalation suggested desperation rather than confidence. I gathered my documentation, secured my computer, and headed toward Dr. Walsh's office. The hallways felt different now, charged with an undercurrent of tension that made every shadow seem significant. As I passed the nurse's station, I caught sight of Cameron in animated conversation with someone I didn't recognize, a man in civilian clothes who seemed out of place in the clinical environment. Our eyes met across the corridor, and this time Cameron's expression held no pretense of friendliness. The mask had finally slipped, revealing something calculating and dangerous beneath the professional facade I had trusted for months. The automatic doors of the administrative wing closed behind me with their familiar soft hiss, but the sound now felt like a barrier between safety and something far more threatening than simple policy violations. Dr. Walsh's office door stood slightly ajar, warm lights spilling into the darkened administrative corridor. I knocked softly and heard her familiar voice invite me in. She looked up from a stack of patient charts, her reading glasses perched on her nose, and immediately sensed the gravity of my visit. Zoe, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's happened? I placed my documentation on her desk with hands that trembled slightly despite my efforts to remain composed. Dr. Walsh, I need to report a serious HIPAA violation, multiple violations actually. It involves Cameron Bennett. Her expression shifted from concern to professional alertness as she gestured for me to sit. I walked her through everything methodically. The suspicious access patterns, the overheard phone conversations, the attempted login to my account, and most damning of all, the external caller who had specifically mentioned Cameron by name when seeking domestic violence information. Dr. Walsh reviewed each piece of evidence with the careful attention of someone who understood the implications. This is extremely serious, Zoe. If what you're documenting is accurate, we're looking at potential criminal violations, not just internal policy breaches. There's more, I said, pulling out my phone to show her the timestamp of the attempted access to my account. This happened less than an hour ago. Cameron knows I'm investigating, and they're trying to determine what I've discovered. She reached for her secure phone immediately. I'm calling hospital security and our legal department. We need to preserve all electronic evidence before anything can be deleted or modified." Her fingers moved quickly across the keypad. "And I'm implementing an immediate restriction on Cameron's system access pending investigation." Within 20 minutes, the administrative wing had transformed into a hub of controlled activity. Hospital security arrived first, followed by our chief information officer and the legal team. I found myself repeating my account multiple times, each telling adding weight to the severity of the situation. "Ms. Martinez," said our head of legal, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Thornton, "your documentation is thorough, but we need to verify the technical aspects before we can proceed with formal charges. Can you walk our IT team through exactly what you observed in the system logs?" The next several hours blurred together in a series of meetings, interviews, and technical reviews. Our IT security specialist confirmed that Cameron's access patterns were indeed anomalous, showing repeated queries for patients with specific demographic markers that had no relation to their assigned cases. Most troubling was the discovery that Cameron had been systematically accessing records of patients who had disclosed domestic violence histories during intake assessments. The pattern suggested either someone was specifically requesting this information, or Cameron was building a database for unknown purposes. "We've found evidence of external file transfers," the IT specialist reported to Dr. Walsh around midnight. "Small data packets sent to an encrypted email account. We're working with law enforcement to trace the recipient." I was exhausted but couldn't bring myself to leave. The weight of what we had uncovered felt enormous. Not just the violation of patient trust, but the realization that I had worked alongside someone capable of such calculated betrayal for months without recognizing the signs. Dr. Walsh found me in the break room around 1 a.m., staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "Zoe, you should go home. We have everything we need to move forward, and you've done more than enough." "I keep thinking about all the patients whose information was compromised," I said. "Women who trusted us with their most vulnerable moments, and we failed to protect them." "You didn't fail anyone," she said firmly. "You recognized something was wrong and took action. That's exactly what our protocols are designed for, and exactly why we have people like you in positions of responsibility." The next morning brought a flurry of activity that rippled through the entire hospital. Cameron's badge access had been revoked overnight, and when they arrived for their shift, they were escorted directly to Human Resources. Word traveled quickly through the nursing staff, though the official explanation was simply that Cameron was being investigated for policy violations. I found myself fielding questions from colleagues throughout the day, trying to balance transparency with the ongoing investigation. The atmosphere in our unit felt charged with uncertainty and whispered conversations. It was Bethany Morrison, one of our senior nurses, who provided the support I desperately needed. She found me during my lunch break, looking overwhelmed by the weight of the situation. "I heard about the investigation," she said quietly, sitting across from me in the cafeteria. "I want you to know that several of us had noticed things about Cameron that didn't sit right, but we couldn't put our finger on what was wrong." "What kind of things?" "Questions that seemed too personal about certain patients. Staying late when they weren't scheduled. And there was something about the way they interacted with some of the domestic violence cases. Too interested, if that makes sense." Her words provided a strange comfort. I hadn't been imagining the subtle wrongness I had sensed. Others had felt it too. "The administration is handling this properly," Bethany continued. "But I want you to know that what you did took courage. A lot of people would have looked the other way or convinced themselves they were overreacting." The formal investigation concluded 3 days later. Cameron was terminated immediately and escorted from the premises by security. The hospital's legal team confirmed that law enforcement was pursuing criminal charges for unauthorized access to protected health information and potential identity theft. Dr. Walsh called me into her office that afternoon to provide the final details. "The external email account Cameron was sending information to has been traced to a private investigation firm that specializes in divorce cases. It appears they were selling patient information to help clients build cases against their spouses. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Cameron had systematically violated the trust of vulnerable patients, turning their most private disclosures into commodities for financial gain." "What happens to the patients whose information was compromised?" I asked. "We're required to notify everyone affected, and we're providing free credit monitoring and identity protection services. Our legal team is also working with law enforcement to ensure the information can't be used in any ongoing legal proceedings. As I left her office, I felt a complex mixture of relief and exhaustion. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the emotional toll of the betrayal lingered. The hospital felt different now. Not unsafe, exactly, but marked by the knowledge that trust, once broken, leaves invisible scars that take time to heal. The investigation had revealed the extent of Cameron's deception, but it had also demonstrated the strength of our protocols and the importance of vigilance in protecting those who depend on us. In the end, the system had worked, but only because someone had been willing to speak up when something felt wrong.